they've discovered these organisms thriving, hundreds of them, and every time they go down to in these deep dive contraptions, um, the ones that work and don't kill everybody anyway, in these in these volcanic rift zones, and they're finding all these tube worms and what looks like crabs and fish and you know clams, you name it. I mean, this is like hundreds of different organisms, and the microbes are so thick that they cover the rocks. I mean, it's just like a layer of both eukaryotic cells and bacteria, and I'm sure archaea, and they're just all they're eating these toxic volcanic chemicals that are just flowing up out of there, okay, in these rift zones that ring the earth like the seams of a baseball. And so these things look like familiar creatures, but
Right.
they're using different metabolic pathways, completely different from what from your land-based, terrestrial or even ocean-going marine creatures and single-celled creatures as well as multicellular creatures that we're familiar with, right? This has just been discovered very recently.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
you know what I'm talking about.
to put that into perspective, if you believe the latest earliest animal fossils or potential animal fossils that have been found are about 900 million years ago, what looks like the material of sponges in they're not very well preserved. You can't tell that it's a sponge, but
Right,
you're like, where else did this fiber come that's in this rock if it's not from a sponge?
right.
And so we could I think we can say that animal life started around 1 billion years ago. And yet remember that back then, there was much, much, much less oxygen in the oceans than there are today. And so that first, um, the first, the hundreds of millions of years before the Cambrian explosion happened in an environment that's much lower in oxygen than the environment that we have today. My supposition being that those strange looking things um, living down deep in these thermal beds and low oxygen areas probably have been that way the whole time. And in the rest of the ocean, the oxygen levels increased, and then on the land, the oxygen levels increased, and we've moved around. But um, this is another thing I talk about on in the latest blog. So I have a post called "Pregnancy is Hypoxic," and so if you look
That's
in
true. Yeah, that's
if
true.
you if you look in the oxygen pressure in the body is similar to um I'm pretty sure it's similar to like the ocean, the deep ocean, or at 5%. I don't know exactly where that happens in the ocean, but it's a more primordial state, the low oxygen state. And that's how, of course, all cells evolved, right? As cells evolved in the absence of oxygen, and then later oxygen came, um and the cells use that to their advantage
Right.
ultimately. At first, it was probably very bad for most of them, but ultimately, some learned how to use it as a tool, right? And so when a when an egg is fertilized, one of the first things that happen within the first couple of days is in the mother, the artery that feeds into the uterus is blocked, and so the partial pressure of oxygen, it becomes quite hypoxic. And I'm arguing that that hypoxia favors a glycolytic state, a glycolytic, very anabolic state. And in those first weeks of pregnancy, those cells are rapidly dividing, and that's what you see in anabolic cells. The cancer cells are glycolytic, and they're rapidly growing. The immune cells are glycolytic, and they're very anabolic. The obese, the adipose tissues in the obese are glycolytic and therefore presumably anabolic, and that's probably why the fat cells are growing. Right. That is the fundamental growthy anabolic state is hypoxia, and so the mother wants that wants the egg to grow, the fetus to grow, and so she restricts oxygen to keep it in a replicative state. And in the early embryo, almost all of the cells are still stem cells. They're all able to grow and divide. And then as the baby comes closer to term, more and more oxygen is uh, can re-enter the placenta. So over time, the oxygen levels get higher and higher. And what does that do? That stimulates mitochondrial growth. That stimulates the production of reactive oxygen species in the cells, and those reactive oxygen species become the signal to the cells that, okay, we don't need to be stem cells anymore. We can differentiate and we can become grown up adult cells because oxygen is here, and now we're sensing the oxygen via these ROS, sensing molecules, and now we can become adult differentiated cells that are no longer just growing and reproducing